HTTP. Oh, something came up! Hey, I'm not so bad at this. Now let's see. There it is!
In Millennium Actress, director Satoshi Kon crafts an indelible epic that's as much a love letter to Japanese cinema as it is between the characters at its heart. Containing almost limitless references to the golden age of live-action film in post-war Japan, the framing device of two documentarians chronicling the story of a legendary actress, Fujiwara Chiyoko, in her own words, paints a rich tapestry of aesthetics and settings in an evocative ode to Japan's cinematic and cultural history in the 1,000 years prior. Like several of Kon's works, the film centers around female identity, and the effect the gaze through which it's framed has on both the character's agency in crafting her own self-image, as well as our perception of her as viewers. On its face, the film appears to be a feminist tale of a woman pushing back against the forces that wish to confine her to reach her own sense of purpose. At the same time, Millennium Actress feels torn between two interpretations. One of Chiyoko's independence and control not only over the events of her own life, but the lens through which they're viewed. But another that her endless chase over this fantasy man can be seen as such male forces exerting ultimate control over her. However, the latter ignores the collaborative interplay between the film's male gaze and the nostalgic gaze of Chiyoko's memories. A partnership that's not possessive, rather empowering, as Chiyoko reaches a state of self-determination, free from the control of such external forces. First, what exactly is this gaze? Perhaps the first thought conjured is the concept of the male gaze formalized by Laura Mulvey's 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, which, at a high level, essentially describes the power gap inherent to depictions of women in media through a male lens, particularly as objects for male desires, of the cameraman, the male characters within the work itself, and the male consumer observing the image. Certainly, the male gaze plays a critical, if unconventional, role in Kon's works, as the director masterfully uses it to construct these narratives of feminine images. However, this is far from the only angle important to these films. More broadly, we can define gaze as the subjective lens through which an image is viewed. At some level, it affects every piece of media we consume. There's the gaze of the artist creating it, the internal gaze of the objects within it, and of course our own individual perspectives we bring to it. This is an extremely high-level overview of a defining principle in critical theory, but for the purposes of this piece, that's all we really need to know. To see how Kon uses the varied gazes in Millennium Actress as an empowering force for Chiyoko, we first need to look at how the film came about as a sort of response to his previous work. Coming off his debut feature, the lauded thriller Perfect Blue, Kon said he wanted to do something different with his next film, taking the framework of that piece and putting a more positive spin on it. In a 2002 interview with Midnight Eye, Kon said, "When I was making Perfect Blue, I thought it would be a positive film, but little by little it became negative, darker. That exhausted me in a way. When I started working with the producer on Millennium Actress, based on the premise I mentioned before, I had the intention of making the two films like sisters, through the depiction of the relationship between admirer and idol. So in adapting that relationship, I wanted to make Millennium Actress in completely opposite, more positive images. In this way, these two films are very important for me, because they show the dark side and the light side of the same relationship." In order to best understand Kon's thought process here, we need to establish the role the gaze played in Perfect Blue as a point of comparison for Millennium Actress's much different take. By Kon's admission, the interconnectedness of the two films' conceit makes such comparison worthwhile. Perfect Blue follows a young pop idol, Kirigoe Mima, making a career shift to becoming a more serious actress, a move her fans see as a betrayal, spiraling into a disturbing, violent story of fear. Everything Mima does seems to be under the pressures placed on her by male forces. Her manager, her agent, the photographer, the screenwriter and director, all of whom push her into roles she's not entirely comfortable with. The identity she forges as a serious actress is no more real than the idealized pop idol Rumi and Mimania obsess over. Mima's lack of clarity to her own identity, coupled with the attacks on her orchestrated by these two, form the catalyst for her descent into paranoia, blending the line between the real and the unreal. The gaze in Perfect Blue is highly objectifying, be it the possessiveness of Mima's fans to the avarice of her managers. but none more so than Mimania's deranged, covetous fixation to preserve the untarnished, real Mima. Mima's role as a performer observed by others devolves from something she seeks out to something she fears. This gaze pushes her to question her own identity, as she rapidly loses her grip on reality. Importantly, all of the male spectators in Perfect Blue are portrayed unfavorably, through their contemptible actions and unsightly, even grotesque appearances. Most of them wind up murdered. Rumi's gaze, arguably the film's ultimate controlling force, can be read as a response to the voyeuristic presence of these male figures. Her obsessive identification with her pure image of Mima leading her to violently lash out against those who would taint it, including Mima herself. Eventually, Rumi convinces herself she is the real Mima, and the person Mima's become is the actual illusion. In the end, Perfect Blue sees Mima take control of her own identity. In the climactic chase scene, she strikes back at Rumi. "I am who I am." On the film's final scene, Susan Napier writes, "No longer the object of a male gaze, she is, in fact, the subject of female speculation, as a group of nurses wonder if she is the real Mima." Their uncertainty suggests that Mima is finally in charge of her own image. Perhaps to underline this change, Mima is shown wearing sunglasses that reflect nothing. Having escaped the obstructive gaze of the spectators around her, Mima ends the film firmly aware of and happy with her identity. Perhaps the most obvious similarity between Perfect Blue and Millennium Actress is their malleable sense of reality. However, their unique blend of illusion with what's real works towards opposite aims. For Perfect Blue, it's representative of Mima's growing paranoia, while in Millennium Actress, it illustrates Chiyoko's control over her story. In both cases, the film within a film echoes the protagonist's own narrative. In Mima's case, her psychosis, in Chiyoko's, her chase for the painter. Kon described this format as such. For an outsider, the dreams and the film within a film are easy to separate from the real world, but for the person who is experiencing them, everything is real. I wanted to describe that kind of situation, so I applied it in Perfect Blue. The producer was very interested in that type of concept, and he proposed making another film which would emphasize that aspect. He said he wanted to make a film that was like a trompe-l'oeil. Pause for a second, I have to look up how to pronounce this. He said he wanted to make a film that was like a trompe-l'oeil, and from there we made the story of Millennium Actress. So for Perfect Blue, in the beginning there was a story, and to tell that story, we applied this method. Whereas with Millennium Actress, the method itself is the aim of the film. This fusion can be seen right from the film's opening minutes, as Genya watches the climactic scene of Chiyoko's last film. When the rocket ship begins to take off, the room itself starts to shake as if by the film, only to realize it was an earthquake in the real world. The ensuing title sequence cuts shots of modern-day Japan to a montage of clips from Chiyoko's films. Where Perfect Blue's gaze proves restrictive, objectifying, and even inducing psychosis, Millennium Actress takes a reverse approach. The camera of Genya and Kyoji is in stark contrast to the oppressive glare of Rumi and Mimania, attempting to objectively capture the subject rather than control her. Where Mima is stalked and traumatized by her fans, this relationship between performer and audience is portrayed as constructive in Millennium Actress. It benefits both Chiyoko and Genya, shrinking the power gap between them in a way that's healthy, not violent, befitting Kon's stated aim of portraying such a relationship in a more positive light. Importantly, the male gaze of Millennium Actress does not oppose Chiyoko's own vision, as in Perfect Blue. Rather, works in tandem with it, allowing it to blossom, much like those lotus flowers. In fact, it's Chiyoko's voice that takes precedence over the chronology of events, filled in by that of her male spectators. Screenwriter Sadayuki Murai described in a 2003 interview with DreamWorks how it's only when their visions of the story come together in the film's latter half that you see the full picture. First of all, Chiyoko is the one telling the story. We interpreted her inner self, which no one else would have ever known. In addition to that, this interviewer tells his story along with her story. The audience comes to know both stories. We developed the structure in such a way so that only when the two stories overlap, the entire view of this film appears in front of your eyes. When you listen to Chiyoko's story alone, you can only see her subjective view of the story, but when Tachibana's story comes into the scene, you obtain a full-scale perspective. Genya's gaze is one of respectful admiration for Chiyoko, never attempting to control her story, even as he begins to take a more active role in it. We see this from the start. The cameraman laments they hadn't gotten permission to interview her sooner, but Genya responds back that she's no longer a performer. Right away, Genya has established a certain respect for Chiyoko, missing in the fans of Mima from Perfect Blue, who took her stepping away from their stage as a betrayal. Unlike Mimania, whose protective desires of his image of Mima lead him beyond obsession to the point of insanity, Genya's identification with the actress exhibits a genuine concern for her well-being and a willingness to aid her in whatever way he can. Eventually, we learn Genya is not inserting himself into this story, rather, he played an actual part in it, as a young assistant director at Guine's studio, supporting her many productions and even saving her from a collapsing set after an earthquake. Rumi and Eiko play similar roles as well, as the semi-guardian, motherly figure attempting to pull the actress back from their change. Rumi tries to keep Mima in her image of the pure pop idol, while Eiko encourages Chiyoko to drop what she believes are childish fantasies and accept a more conventional role in the home. Both characters manipulate the actress, partly or totally to blame for setting them on their respective paths. Both express jealousy towards their younger, fresher counterpart. However, where Rumi's fixation leads her to madness, Eiko eventually displays some level of remorse to Chiyoko for the pain she caused her. Kon described how Eiko represents the general knowledge of life. The societal pressures to conform appear right from the beginning, as Chiyoko's mother refuses to let her join the studio to fulfill a more traditional role, finding a husband and taking over the shop. Through the rest of the film, Eiko takes over as her maternal figure, attempting to wake her up from her dream. Murai put it thusly: "As far as the consistency of Chiyoko's action patterns are concerned, I originally had an idea to make Chiyoko escape from a beleaguered environment. What I mean by beleaguered is when she is incorporated in the system of the film studio, she always finds a way out. Earlier in the film, she escapes in Manchuria. Later, when she is a prostitute in the red light district, she tries to escape. Being in confinement is part of our process to adapt to the social system in the modern society. In the case of Chiyoko, she steps out with the power of love. I wanted to express something like her exhilaration. There is always someone to block her way. That is Eiko Shimao. But through all of these conflicting forces, Millennium Actress's predominant gaze is through Chiyoko's memory. Murai said, "I wanted to intertwine fragments of Japanese history with the story of her life. In terms of craftsmanship, I wrote the screenplay underscoring the fact that she is the one telling the story. In other words, what she is telling is more significant than how the actual events took place. The implication is that the gaze of memories is as exhilarating and even freeing as the rich cinematic worlds Chiyoko takes us through. Perfect Blue and Millennium Actress both present a blending of illusion and reality, but where the former's is asphyxiating, the latter is liberating. Illusions can't become real. Mima tries to reassure herself, as she's tormented by the image of her alter ego. But Millennium Actress presents a different sort of illusion, that of memory. Not Kon's first foray into the subject, his screenplay for the short film Magnetic Rose presents this illusion as a largely negative, seductive force, positing how easy it is to be consumed in the past and lose all semblance for the present, for reality. Millennium Actress, however, shows us the power of memory, the rich narrative it weaves. Chiyoko is not prisoner to it. She's enriched by it. Napier writes, "Ultimately, the final gaze that envelops Millennium Actress is one of nostalgia, a still palpable presence in modern Japan. It is to Kon's credit that he can manipulate the nostalgic gaze to create a satisfyingly rich vision of the past that is remarkably free of sentimentality. Even so, does the film not take a conservative approach in sending Chiyoko on this chase? Can we really call this her agency, fighting against forces that wish to control her, if the end goal never gets any closer?" Individually, each of these films and character archetypes Chiyoko slides into only seem to reinforce the traditional image expected of women. Each of her roles inevitably centers around a male. But taken together, the accumulation of these works makes a comment on the superficiality of these images, that any one could be exchanged for the other without losing anything. Chiyoko is not constrained by them. Rather, by cycling through this endless procession of stereotypes, she comes to the realization of herself as the key. The painter was no more real than the images he transcribed. The last she sees of him is in a painting itself. Through this lens, the constant transition between the worlds of her films and the reality of her memories can be seen as Chiyoko's recognition that this biography she's created of herself is as much a fiction as her films. Where will her chase lead her? What is this most important thing in the world? It's not the answers to these questions she so loves, but the questions themselves. She still has power over her story. Part of the reason Millennium Actress and Perfect Blue are so effective is because of the way Kon recognizes and even calls attention to the gaze through which we view them. Problems arise when that gaze betrays the characters and narrative being presented, particularly as it relates to the objectification of female characters. But in both of these films, Kon's application of gaze augments the story rather than hinders it. In Perfect Blue, the male gaze serves an unflattering, twisted reflection of these desires. In Millennium Actress, the lead's gaze represents her control over the narrative and her own identity. Through all of their trials, both films see their leads find that sense of self-affirmation. Much like Mima at the end of Perfect Blue, Chiyoko sees herself for who she is, what she's really after. That it wasn't the painter she loved, but herself chasing after him. Her reflection is not one she fears, not determined by anyone but herself. Chiyoko takes off towards a new horizon, a reality giving way to illusion one more time. Only she doesn't run from it. Chiyoko runs towards it.